I stood in my lab, my hands shaking slightly as I gripped the phone. My father's voice came through the speaker, as casual as if he were discussing the weather. "I've transferred your research patent to Vivian. She deserves it more than you. She'll know how to commercialize it properly." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. All the years I'd spent working, the sacrifices I'd made, everything I had put into my research, it was suddenly gone. Just like that. My father, Richard Sinclair, CEO of Sinclair Pharmaceuticals, had handed over my life's work to my 25-year-old stepsister, Vivian, who had done nothing but ride on the coattails of others. She didn't even understand the science behind it. "You can't do that," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding in my chest. "The patent isn't yours to transfer." He scoffed. "Of course it is. Sinclair Pharmaceuticals funded your research. Everything you develop belongs to the company. And as CEO, I decide who handles what." I could hear the smirk in his voice. "Vivian has the business acumen you lack. She understands the market." I glanced at the email on my screen from the U.S. Patent Office, confirming receipt of my independent patent application. What my father didn't know was that I had seen this coming. Ever since he married Vivian's mother, Evelyn Hawthorne, 2 years ago, I had been pushed aside. Little by little, he removed me from key projects, sidelining me for someone who didn't understand the work. "Well," I said carefully, "I hope Vivian enjoys trying to commercialize research she doesn't understand. Is there anything else?" There was a pause, and I could tell that he had expected me to beg, to cry, to plead. My calm response threw him off balance. "That's all. I'll have legal send over the transfer papers." "Good luck with that," I said, ending the call. The moment the line went dead, I sent a quick text to my lawyer, Cassandra Blake. "He did it, just like we predicted." Then I sat down at my desk, hands shaking, not from fear, but from anticipation. The wheels I'd set in motion months ago were about to start turning. I thought back to the day everything changed, when my father introduced us to his new wife, Evelyn Hawthorne, and her daughter, Vivian, at the company's annual charity gala. I'd just finished presenting my preliminary research findings to potential investors, and the response had been overwhelming. But instead of congratulating me, my father steered the conversation toward Vivian's recent MBA graduation. "Vivian will be joining the company as head of strategic development," Richard announced proudly. "Strategic development," he announced proudly. "She'll help modernize our approach, bring fresh perspectives." I watched as my years of hard work, my doctorate in biochemistry, my published research, all faded into the background while Vivian became the new golden child. At first, I tried to collaborate with her, to share my knowledge of the industry and our research protocols. But it quickly became clear that Vivian wasn't interested in learning. She wanted control. The signs were there. My access to certain labs restricted. My research team gradually reassigned. My funding quietly reduced. Then I started noticing Vivian in meetings about my drug delivery system, taking notes, asking questions that revealed her fundamental lack of understanding of the science involved. That's when I contacted Cassandra, an old friend from college who specialized in intellectual property law. "Document everything," she advised. "Every email, every restriction, every change. And most importantly, file your own patent application independently of Sinclair Pharmaceuticals." I worked nights and weekends, carefully documenting every aspect of my research that wasn't directly funded by company resources. The breakthrough itself had come during my own time, using my personal lab equipment, meticulously logged and verified by independent witnesses. My phone buzzed with a response from Cassandra. Papers filed with USPTO. Your independent patent application is solid. Their transfer attempt will trigger the investigation we've been waiting for. I opened my drawer and pulled out a thick folder labeled Project Shield. Every document, every email, every piece of evidence showing how my father and Vivian had systematically tried to push me out and steal my research. The official company records would show that while Sinclair Pharmaceuticals had funded some early stages of my research, the key breakthroughs and methodologies were developed independently. Another text from Cassandra. BTW, that business acumen your stepsister claims? I did some digging. Her online MBA program isn't even accredited. I wasn't surprised. Vivian had always been more focused on appearances than substance. She spent more time posting on LinkedIn about being a female pioneer in pharma than actually learning about pharmaceutical development. My office phone rang, Vivian's extension. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing what she'd say. Sure enough, her message was dripping with condescension, just as I expected. Nat, we need to discuss the transfer of your research project. I have some ideas for monetization that you clearly haven't considered. Call me ASAP. I started gathering my things, knowing the next few hours would be crucial. The patent challenge would trigger an automatic investigation into the research's origins and development. Every document would be scrutinized, every claim verified. As I packed my laptop, my phone buzzed again, this time with an email from the company's legal department. The subject line read, "Urgent, IP transfer documentation required." I forwarded it to Cassandra without opening it. The elevator ride to the parking garage gave me time to reflect on how we got here. My Eleanor Whitmore had founded Sinclair Pharmaceuticals with my father 30 years ago. She was the scientific genius. He handled the business side. When she died of cancer 10 years ago, I devoted myself to continuing her work, believing that together, my father and I could honor her legacy. But something changed in him after he met Evelyn Hawthorne. Suddenly, the company's scientific foundation became secondary to its market value. Research timelines were rushed, protocol shortened. Vivian's arrival was the final straw. Suddenly, everyone had to prove their worth in terms of market potential rather than scientific merit. As I reached my car, another call came through. My father again. This time, I let it go to voicemail. He'd have plenty to say to me soon enough. But first, he needed to learn some hard truths about what he just tried to give away. I drove straight to Cassandra's office, where she was waiting with her team. The conference room walls were covered with timelines and documents, the paper trail we'd been building for months. "Right on schedule," Cassandra said as I walked in. "Your father just tried to file the patent transfer paperwork. As expected, it triggered immediate flags with the USPTO, since your independent application is already on file." "How long until they realize?" I asked, setting my laptop on the conference table. "They probably already have. The USPTO would have immediately notified them of the existing patent application." Cassandra smiled. "I guess your father is having a very interesting conversation with his legal team right now." As if on cue, my phone lit up with a text from my father. "What have you done?" I showed it to Cassandra, who nodded approvingly. "Perfect! Let them sweat while we prepare our response. We have meetings set up with the patent office tomorrow morning. Your documentation is impeccable. They won't be able to claim corporate ownership of your independent research." I thought about Vivian, probably sitting in her new office, planning how to take credit for work she couldn't begin to understand. I thought about my father, who'd been so quick to dismiss my contributions in favor of his new family's ambitions. "What happens next?" I asked Cassandra, though I already knew the answer. "Next, We watch them try to explain how they plan to transfer a patent they don't own. The USPTO takes attempted patent fraud very seriously, and the SEC doesn't take kindly to corporate fraud either. Let's see how Richard explains this to the shareholders when I go public. Your father's going to have to choose between admitting he tried to steal your research or claiming he didn't do due diligence before attempting to transfer intellectual property. Either way, it's not going to look good for Sinclair Pharmaceuticals. My phone kept buzzing. Calls from Vivian, my father, the company's legal team. I silenced it and focused on the documents in front of me. For the first time in years, I felt completely certain about my path forward. I signed the incorporation papers, officially bringing Sinclair Biotech into existence. A final text from my father. "We need to talk, now." I smiled. "Yes," I texted back. "We certainly do." The next morning, chaos erupted, not just in Sinclair Pharmaceuticals, but across the biotech industry. Headlines exploded. Sinclair CEO accused of patent fraud. News anchors dissected the scandal. Investors panicked. And Richard? He was nowhere to be found. I watched from across the street as lawyers rushed in and out of the building, carrying stacks of papers and wearing expressions of barely concealed panic. My father's attempted patent transfer had backfired spectacularly. Cassandra sat beside me in her car, calmly reviewing our documentation one last time before our meeting with the USPTO representatives. "Your father has called 6 times in the last hour," she noted, glancing at my phone. "Should we hear what he has to say?" I shook my head, watching another group of lawyers hurry into the building. He had plenty of chances to talk before he tried to steal my research. Let him sweat. My phone buzzed again. Vivian this time. Her message made me laugh out loud. "This is just a misunderstanding. Daddy was trying to help you by putting more qualified people in charge of your project. Don't ruin everything because you're jealous." "More qualified?" Cassandra snorted, reading over my shoulder. "Does she even understand what your research involves?" "She thinks drug delivery systems are like Uber for medicine," I said, shaking my head. "Last week, she suggested making an app where patients could subscribe to cancer treatment, like it's a damn streaming service. Last month, she suggested we should make an app for it. Our meeting with the USPTO wasn't until 10 a.m., but we'd arrived early to watch the drama unfold. Through the glass walls of Sinclair Pharmaceuticals' lobby, I could see people gathering in the conference room. My father, Vivian, Evelyn Hawthorne, and what looked like half the legal team. "Ready?" Cassandra asked, as another call from my father lit up my phone. I nodded, gathering our files. "More than ready." We walked into the building just as Vivian rushed toward the elevator. She stopped short when she saw me, her perfectly maintained composure slipping for a moment. "Nat, thank God! You need to call off whatever this is. Daddy's furious, and you're making us look bad." She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. "Making you look bad?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean like trying to steal a patent you have no right to?" She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Don't be dramatic. We're family. Everything in this company is family property." "Sinclair Biotech isn't family property," I replied calmly, "and neither is my research." Her perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Sinclair what?" Before I could respond, my father's voice boomed across the lobby. "Natalie, in my office, now!" I turned to see him standing in the doorway of his corner office, his face flushed with anger. For a moment, I saw him as I had as a child, the intimidating figure whose approval I'd always sought. But that spell had been broken. "Actually," Cassandra stepped forward, "any discussions will need to happen with counsel present. We have a meeting with the USPTO representatives in 20 minutes. Shall we all convene in the main conference room? I watched my father's face darken as he recognized Cassandra. He'd met her at company events before, but I doubted he'd ever imagined she'd be standing here in this capacity. "This is a family matter," he growled. "No," I corrected him. "This is a legal matter. You tried to transfer a patent you don't own. That's fraud." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several employees passing through the lobby stopped to stare. Vivian's face had gone pale. "Conference room," my father snapped, turning on his heel. "Everyone, now!" The next few minutes were a blur of activity as lawyers shuffled papers and people took their seats. I sat across from my father, with Cassandra beside me. Vivian hovered uncertainly before taking a seat next to Evelyn Hawthorne, who was trying her best to look concerned rather than annoyed. The USPTO representatives arrived precisely on time, two serious-looking women who introduced themselves as Dr. Linda Chang and Ms. Andrea Martinez. They wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "I want you to sign these." The color drained from my father's face as he read the document titles. "Resignation of CEO, Sinclair Pharmaceuticals, and Transfer of Controlling Shares." You're taking over the company?" he stammered. "Not exactly," I corrected. "Sinclair Biotech will be acquiring Sinclair Pharmaceuticals. We'll retain the name, the facilities, and most of the staff. But there will be some restructuring." Vivian gasped. "You can't! You wouldn't!" "Oh, but I can," I said, meeting her eyes. "And I will. You see, Vivian, sometimes business acumen means knowing when to walk away." The USPTO representatives were watching with interest. Dr. Chang nodded approvingly. "It seems Dr. Sinclair has a very clear understanding of the market after all." My father slumped back in his chair, defeated. Evelyn Hawthorne was whispering furiously to Vivian, but I tuned them out. My focus was on the future, on building a company that valued scientific innovation, not just market trends. "One more thing," I said, looking directly at my father. "Sinclair Biotech will have a strict policy against nepotism, so if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run." I stood up, Cassandra following close behind. As we left the conference room, I could hear the whispers starting already. The news would spread through the company like wildfire. Natalie Sinclair, the ousted researcher, was back, and this time she was in charge. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. I restructured the research department, promoting scientists who'd been sidelined in favor of Vivian's business-oriented approach. I reevaluated the company's pipeline, prioritizing projects with real scientific merit, even if they weren't guaranteed to be immediate blockbusters. And I made sure that every employee, from the lab technicians to the marketing team, understood that at Sinclair Pharmaceuticals, science came first. The market responded. Investors, who'd been wary of the company's recent direction, were reassured by the return to a science-focused strategy. My drug delivery system, now properly patented and under my control, attracted major partnerships and funding. And Vivian? Well, she found out that an unaccredited online MBA wasn't exactly a hot commodity in the job market. As for my father, he eventually came to terms with his mistakes. He resigned from the company, and though we never quite regained the closeness we once had, we reached a place of mutual respect. He even started volunteering at a local science museum, sharing his love of biochemistry with a new generation. And me? I stood at the top floor of Sinclair Biotech's headquarters, looking down at the city below. This wasn't just about winning a battle, it was about reshaping an industry. I picked up the phone and made the call that would define the future. Let's get to work. We have lives to save. Sinclair Pharmaceuticals was thriving, not just as a business, but as a force for scientific innovation. And every time I walked into my office, I remembered the day I stood up to my father, to Vivian, to everyone who tried to steal my research. It was the day I stopped being just a scientist and became a leader. The FDA investigation into Sinclair Pharmaceuticals revealed more than just attempted patent theft. Internal audits uncovered rushed trials, manipulated data, and a pattern of cutting corners that stretched back to shortly after my father's marriage to Evelyn Hawthorne. I was in a meeting with potential investors when Cassandra burst in, her face flushed with excitement. "Nat, turn on the news! Now!" The headline scrolling across the screen made my heart stop. Sinclair Pharmaceutical CEO steps down amid investigation. There was my father, looking aged and defeated, reading a prepared statement. In light of recent events and the ongoing FDA investigation, I am announcing my immediate resignation. As CEO of Sinclair Pharmaceuticals, I acknowledge that under my leadership, the company strayed from its founding principles. The investors, representatives from 3 major venture capital firms, watched with keen interest. "Well said, Victoria Chang," the lead investor said. "I'd say this makes our decision easier, Dr. Sinclair. Your Eleanor Whitmore built Sinclair Pharmaceuticals on scientific integrity. From what we've seen, you're doing the same with Sinclair Biotech." 2 hours later, I had $50 million in Series A funding and a clear path forward for my research. My phone buzzed constantly with messages, former colleagues, industry contacts, even old family friends. But one message stood out. "Can we talk?" Vivian. I almost deleted it, but curiosity won out. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe, far from both our offices. Vivian looked different. No designer clothes, no perfectly styled hair. She seemed smaller somehow, more real. "I'm sorry," she said as soon as I sat down. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need to say it." I studied her face, searching for the manipulation I'd grown used to seeing. Instead, I found something that looked like genuine remorse. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "You must have known you'd be exposed eventually." She stared into her coffee. "Daddy made it sound so simple. He said you were being selfish, that family companies needed to stick together. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I could be what he wanted." She looked up, eyes wet. "I never understood what you did. The science, the research. It was like a foreign language, but I wanted so badly to matter." "So you tried to steal something you didn't understand?" "I convinced myself it wasn't stealing, that it was just family resources being redistributed." She wiped her eyes. "God, I sound just like Evelyn Hawthorne, don't I?" Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from Cassandra. "FDA report dropping in 10 minutes. It's worse than we thought." The report was devastating. Years of rushed trials, manipulated data, and ignored safety protocols. Sinclair Pharmaceutical stock plummeted. The board announced an emergency meeting. Vivian read the news on her phone, her face paling. "He knew," she whispered. "Daddy knew about all of this. That's why he was so desperate to announce my version of your research. He needed a win to distract from what was coming. And you were his shield. I realized, if things went wrong, you'd take the fall as the inexperienced newcomer who mishandled everything." Tears rolled down her cheeks. I was so stupid. Looking at her, I felt my anger fade into something like pity. "Yes, you were, but you weren't the only one he manipulated." My phone buzzed again. Dr. Chen. Natalie, the board just voted. They're cleaning house. Your father, Evelyn Hawthorne, the entire executive team. They want to talk to you. Me? Why? They want to restore the company's credibility. They're thinking about the symbolism of having Richard Sinclair's daughter, Eleanor's daughter, help rebuild. I thought about my Eleanor Whitmore, about the company she'd built, about the principles she'd instilled in me. Then I thought about Sinclair Biotech, about the work we were doing, about the lives we could save. Tell them I'm honored, I said, but I've already got a company. One built on the same principles my Eleanor Whitmore valued. Vivian was watching me. You're not coming back? But maybe it's time you built something of your own too, something real this time. Later that evening, as I worked late in my lab, I had one final visitor, my father. He looked old, tired, nothing like the intimidating figure who tried to steal my research months ago. I suppose you're happy now, he said, sinking into a chair. The mighty Richard Sinclair, brought down by his own daughter? You brought yourself down, I corrected him. I just refused to let you take me with you. I was trying to protect the company. No, I cut him off. You were trying to protect yourself. Eleanor Whitmore built that company on scientific integrity, on helping people. You turned it into a shell game of quick profits and corner cutting. He flinched at the mention of my Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor? She would be disappointed in me, wouldn't she? Yes, I said quietly, she would. And you? What would make you happy now? Money? Control of the company? I gestured around my lab. This makes me happy. Real research, real science, real progress. Everything Eleanor Whitmore taught me to value. He looked around, really seeing it for the first time. The state-of-the-art equipment, the busy researchers, the wall of whiteboards covered in complex formulas. You really did it, he said softly. Built all this on your own. No thanks to you? He stood slowly. I don't suppose there's any way to fix this. I thought about all the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. Not between us. But you can still fix yourself. Tell the truth. Take responsibility. Be someone Eleanor Whitmore would have been proud of. After he left, I sat in my lab, thinking about everything that had happened. My father had tried to give away my life's work, but in doing so, he'd forced me to build something better, something truly mine. Cassandra found me there hours later. The board's handling the FDA violations, implementing new oversight. They're talking about renaming the company, making a fresh start. Good, I said. It needs one. And us? The latest trials are showing amazing results. We're on track for FDA approval months ahead of schedule. I smiled, thinking of my Eleanor Whitmore, of her dedication to real science. Then let's keep going. There are people waiting for this treatment, lives we can save. Speaking of saving things, Cassandra said, Vivian called. She's enrolled in community college, studying basic chemistry. Says she wants to understand the science this time, not just pretend. I thought about Vivian, in tears in a cafe, about the weight of expectations and the courage it takes to start over. Good for her, I said sincerely. The next morning, I arrived early at the lab, watching the sunrise through the windows. On my desk sat a small package. Inside was my Eleanor Whitmore's old lab notebook, sent by Dr. Chen. On the first page, she'd written words I'd never seen before. To my Natalie, who sees the world not just as it is, but as it could be. Never let anyone dim your light or steal your dreams. You are capable of more than they know. Love, Eleanor Whitmore. I traced her handwriting with my finger, feeling closer to her than I had in years. She'd known somehow that I'd need these words someday. Cassandra appeared in my doorway. Ready to change the world? I smiled, picking up my Eleanor Whitmore's notebook. More than ready. Let's show them what real innovation looks like. Looking out at my team, at the work we were doing, at the future we were building, I felt nothing but gratitude. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better. Months later, I stood in front of a crowd of journalists at Sinclair Biotech, the flashing lights blinding me as cameras clicked away. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel any hesitation. This wasn't just about leading a company. It was about reshaping the future of an entire industry. This isn't just about me, I began, my voice strong and unwavering. This is about every scientist who has been silenced, every researcher whose work was stolen. From today, things will change. Sinclair Biotech is built on integrity, and we will never let corporate greed outweigh human lives. The applause that followed was deafening, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of everything I had fought for. This was just the beginning.